This is No Operating Manual, a podcast about building healthcare companies when there's no one clear path and no operations manual.
My guest today is Michelle Yu, co-founder and CEO of Josie. Before founding Josie, Michelle spent more than a decade advising healthcare executives at firms like Deloitte, the Advisory Board, and Optum. Her work focused on strategy, growth, and performance. But a few years ago, she shifted her attention to something less often discussed: what happens to working parents before, during, and after parental leave. Josie partners with organizations to support working parents through parental leave coaching and return to work transitions. Michelle Yu, welcome to No Operating Manual.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. I'm excited for this conversation.
You built your career advising healthcare leaders. In your own words, tell us about your background and your personal experience that made this work around Josie feel so important to build.
Great question. And thank you again for inviting me to be here with you and share my story. So, as you mentioned before, I spent nearly 13 years in healthcare consulting, and I absolutely loved my career. I fell into consulting sort of by accident. I had graduated with a master's in public health and thought I'd go into policy, and was in Chicago and couldn't seem to land many interviews with policy organizations. And Deloitte came knocking on the door. And I started my career in healthcare consulting, and I just loved everything about it. I loved the project work. I loved the team-based nature of the work. I loved my clients, who were almost exclusively providers. So large nonprofit health systems, academic medical centers, regional health systems. And they were just so wonderful to work with. And we got to do such interesting work with them. And so I just invested and poured myself into that career. It's not just I think the hours and the travel and the commitment, but it became a part of my identity. It really became an important part of who I was, how I defined myself. And so I tied a lot of my sense of self-worth to my career and my professional identity. So then, come 2018, I'm still in that profession. By now, at this point, I'm at a company called the Advisory Board, which is a healthcare research and consulting company based in Washington, D.C., where I live. It was subsequently acquired by Optum United Health Group, which is how I entered Optum. But I became pregnant for the first time in 2018 when I was in that role. And I very naively thought, I tell this to so many people, I very naively thought that I would have my baby, I would go back to work, and things would more or less be the same. I, was very organized, very type A, very much able to control things. And I'm like, I will figure this out. And I really struggled. And, I think, I'm saying this with as much grace as possible to myself, but I think I was arrogant. There was definitely a tinge of arrogance in my thinking, you know, and it really rocked my world. I went right back to traveling, got right back on the road. I remember pumping and milk in airport bathrooms and, crying because I'm like sleep deprived and so emotional. And I know this is a very long-winded answer, so I'll fast forward and just say I started to notice that myself feeling resentful for work, interrupting my home life, and home life interrupting my work life, resentful there too to my family and friends. And I also started to notice that other people, very similar to me in my situation, where they had invested a lot in their careers, they were at the cusp of very senior leadership roles and choosing to leave or scale back because it just wasn't working. This disproportionately impacts women. But I have, through my work at Josie, also have seen absolutely non-birthing partners also have those questions. And so that is kind of the impetus for launching our company, Josie, which is named after my daughter, and providing the right supports at those high-risk sort of transitional moments so that people can find that sustainable path forward in their careers.
As you're going through this and you're developing Josie, what did you settle on as your business model?
Like many startups, which I believe your listeners, there are a few out there, there were pivots along the way. And we've definitely worked with different models, and I think importantly learned how to really listen to our customers to come up with our current model. And when I say customers, and this is something that I know I talk with so many founders about, who actually is that? And identifying who that is and being able to take that feedback. And when you're a B2B to C company like we are, so our business is B2B. We primarily provide services directly to employers who then offer our services to their employees. And so this B2B2C kind of, I didn't even honestly know that that was a term until I started Josie. But our business model is essentially we contract directly, typically with HR leaders, benefits leaders in the healthcare space. We work directly with a lot of wellness and well-being leaders, and we contract with them for scope of work that's unique to their organization that includes a combination of one-on-one support for parents going through parental leave or other big life transitions, trainings and events for a larger set of employees, and then on-demand content, specifically targeting working parents and tough transitional moments in that journey that they're in. So that's our business model. We sort of craft it based on what the client's needs are.
Setting the scene, you are pitching an HR leader and they share their parental leave policies. When you're looking at those policies with them, what is the key driver that allows that decision maker to really understand the difference a program like Josie can make?
Thank you for asking this question and bringing this up, Erin, because I want to first acknowledge here just parental leave and the state of paid parental leave in the US is just it falls short if you look across the globe at what other countries are doing. Just to share a little bit of data, on average, paid parental leave among the top 500 US companies is hovering at just below 12. When you look at healthcare specifically, and as I mentioned earlier, we actually work with several healthcare organizations because that's where I came from. And we love partnering with health systems. But the top 20 US hospitals, the average parental leave for birthing individuals is, I believe it's 7.8 weeks, I want to say. And then for non birthing, it's 6.6. I might be off by like a couple point whatever's, tenths of a point, but they're, as you can see, they're fall below the 12 week. And so just putting that out there to acknowledge, and if you contrast that with the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatric recommendations for the right amount of time for paid parental leave for full recovery, it's actually 12 weeks. And so it's interesting to me that healthcare organizations on average fall below that. Meanwhile, the organizations that represent them are saying something different. So, anyways, just acknowledging that to start. But oftentimes with organizations I work with, both healthcare and non, will often say, we have a leave policy in place. Why is this then a necessary um, support that we need in addition to that? And what I tell them, and I often see in organizations, is while parental leave is absolutely so important to have and to have good policies in place around that, it's so important. It is often a check the box compliance and administrative exercise, but it can absolutely be a strategic retention lever for organizations. So reframing parental leave from a logistical administrative matter to a strategic opportunity is something that I talk to organizations about a lot. Because here's the thing, here's what's going through your employees' minds during that time. Can I make this work? How will I make this work? Is this going to be the right place for me? How did my manager respond to my news? How does my organization going to support me through this? What do my colleagues say when I'm going through this, right? All of those things can make or break someone's experience during parental leave and ultimately the decision as to whether or not they are going to stay at that organization. And I often tell people, if you look at your data, the people who are going on leave are often those rising leaders. It's people who have been in their careers for some time. And there's data to show that people are starting to have families a little bit later once they're more established in their careers. So this is your leadership pipeline. So reframing that from this is a nice support to protecting your leadership bench, I think is oftentimes where then I see people, a light bulb turns on. They're like, I understand why this is so important.
So I know Josie's still relatively new and growing, but I think to that point, you talked about being on that cusp of senior leadership roles. So I guess what have you learned specifically about how that experience, the parental leave experience before, during, after, and how that shapes that long-term leadership trajectory? Is it just that more birthing parents are in that leadership pipeline because they're getting that kind of support, or are there other things that you're seeing along the way?
Yeah. So let me start with a data point just to illustrate this. 4 in 10 female physicians will leave or scale back in their careers within 6 years of residency. The primary reason cited is family building. That data point, when I first read it, just jaw dropped. And part of me, when I actually talk to my physician friends, they're like, oh, yeah, that's not surprising at all. Like they're not shocked. And then when you dig into those studies and look at the factors behind it, there's quite a few things going on. One of them is, of course, female physicians will often take the brunt of household responsibilities and childcare. And this is even if they are the breadwinner in the family. There's data and research to back all of this up. There's a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association that I can share with your audience, or if you'd like in your podcast notes, if it's helpful. But that's one. Another one is female physicians, again, sticking with that particular cohort, will often experience discrimination when they come back to work, specifically around lactation, as well as being considered for leadership roles. So I was talking to a physician at a University of California system a few months back, and she was talking about how she had a leadership role at her organization, then went on a maternity leave and parental leave, I should say, and came back. And she noticed that she was being excluded from certain meetings. And I think while the reason was well intentioned behind that, I want to give this person space, I don't want to invite them back into these big meetings. She actually was really hurt that she wasn't invited back and wanted to be back in that room. So I think part of this also, a huge part of what we do at Josie too, that's important, is equipping leaders, particularly your executive leaders, your managers, your people leaders, with the tools to make sure you're asking the right questions and not making assumptions about the folks that are going on a leave and coming back as well, to make sure that they can stay on that path.
That's so important, having had children and come back, it can be lonely when
Very,
you're jumping
yes,
on and you are, kind of straddling that. So I can imagine that frustration of not being able
absolutely.
to be in the room or being overwhelmed by being in the room too. Um,
True. Everyone's different, right? And
Everybody's
sorry,
different.
since you mentioned it, the loneliness, we see that so much as well. And there is a desire I've noticed among many of our clients for just some community at work, especially around this period of time, just to know that, I mean, even being able to be in a room with folks who are maybe going through something similar and saying, oh, that's normal to feel that way, or I'm not the only one, is
Yeah.
very powerful. So anyways, I just thought I'd throw that in
No,
there.
yeah, again, bringing that community together. So you talked about your clinical experience and your co-founder's background is also on the clinical side. How is the experience of parental leave different in clinical settings compared to corporate, or how is corporate different than clinical?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a great question. Just since you mentioned it, I have a background in healthcare. My co-founder, Allison, also worked in hospital settings. But we also have a chief physician officer, Dr. Mikhail Dimo, who is amazing. She's a neurologist and a mom of two. So very lived experience when it comes
Mhm.
to having gone through these transitions. And she herself, she's a coach, a certified coach as well, and does coaching for us. Her coaching experience, she will attribute her staying in her career and finding a path forward through her personal coaching experience during that time, because she is one of those people who really thought about, maybe I need to step back from my career. And so, anyways, for what it's worth, I thought I'd mention that. So there are a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. So I'll start with some similarities. I think regardless of whether you're in a clinical setting or you're in a more corporate environment, I've noticed that many people, when they come back to work, especially again for the birthing partner, the mom, there's a little bit of a like, can I still do this? Your confidence is a little bit shaken for whatever reason. And these are high performing, proven their value over years, okay, years in their career. And I can say this because I felt the same way myself. Going back to work and thinking, oh my gosh, like, can I still do this? Do people still see me the same way? You know, I've got this identity as a parent now, which is so important to me, but how is that impacting how people see me as a professional and somebody that wants to grow my career? And so that is a very common thing I've seen across both clinical and non-clinical settings. I will also say something that happens in both sides is just one of the easiest things organizations can do to make the experience better is just to better communicate what you already have. You don't have to invest in new solutions like Josie, but most of the time there's all these wonderful things that are just not being communicated at the right time and in the right ways. And so I remember when I was at Optum, we had this amazing benefit called Milk Stork. It's for traveling employees, you can actually have your breast milk shipped back to your home. So you don't have to carry it through TSA. which is, by the way, a whole thing. I have tips for those who do that. There, you got to get the ice from the vendors in the airport. Anyways, I didn't know that we had that until after I stopped breastfeeding because I was having a casual conversation with someone in a hallway and they're like, "You didn't know that we had this?" And it's one of those things that gets lost in a newsletter or, you maybe hear it during your onboarding or open enrollment and then you forget about it because you don't need it at the moment. So I will say that is a similarity. A lot of organizations struggle with just getting the right supports in front of people at the right time. Now, differences, there's quite a few differences. One thing in particular I've noticed, and when it comes to lactation and breastfeeding support, in clinical organizations, it seems to be much more challenging than in the corporate environment. On the corporate side, I've seen clients now doing like incredible like things, outfitting their mother's rooms and pumping rooms with all sorts of things, extra pump parts and extra snacks, lactation cookies, comfortable chair, the ability to, I don't know, listen to like nice meditative music while you're pumping or breastfeeding or whatever. Just a nice setup. And of course, also set up for people if they want to continue to take a call while they're pumping. Having a nice table there where you could put your laptop down and be able to take that call. All those things. However, on the flip side, healthcare, I've noticed that We've got clinicians. I think it was in a Boston-based hospital, OB-GYNs pumping in the bathroom. We've got a friend of mine who's a CRNA mom. She was a new mom a couple years ago, and she was telling me that her pump break was too short for her to walk over to where the one pumping room was and get back to her floor in time to get back to where she needed to be. So because of that, she's like, I just had to find the closest bathroom to pump also, because it's just not physically, close enough for her to get to. So that in particular, I think, is a huge difference. And then just generally speaking, especially speaking with my chief physician officer, just the idea of taking on the 24/7 caregiver. Let me put it that way. You're caregiving at home, you're caregiving at work. And that comes with just an additional amount of emotional and mental load and just exhaustion. That is a big difference as well.
I can't even imagine like 24/7 caregiving, when you go to work and you're carrying and then you're coming home and you're carrying, it's never ending. So I can't even
Yeah,
imagine.
exactly.
Jumping right back into it, share with me the one surprising things that parents aren't ready for. What is the one thing when you went back that you want everybody to know when they're going back to work after parental leave?
Yeah. So a couple of things. We actually survey all of our clients and we ask the questions upon the return to work. We ask the question, I'm going to botch the exact wording, but it's like, what are the top two things that you're most concerned about when you return to work? And then what are top two things you're most excited about when you return to work? And we got a list of options there. And what comes up as what you're most excited about that I don't think is too surprising, but I think maybe you don't always think about it when you're going back to work after baby is people are so excited to re-engage with their colleagues and just like have a conversation that's not about their baby. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm using a different part of my brain again. And it feels so good. There's quiet, it feels so nice. And getting to talk with people and remember a part of myself and who I was before I had a baby.
That identity piece that you've been missing for however long your leave is now being re-engaged.
Exactly, and people are like, "Wow, this feels nice." And at the same time, well, on the challenge side, and this is where the whole concept of like these two things can coexist, have feelings of sadness for being apart from this little being that you've been with for like the last several weeks, having that anxiety around, are they going to be okay with whatever childcare arrangement you've set up? And so those concerns coexisting with and also it's kind of nice to have my own space at the same time is, so many people go through that. And it's like these opposing sort of things. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But those are a couple things. The other thing that people always check the box on that I find interesting when in the top concerns part is self-care and taking care of yourself. When you read the commentary, it's like, I feel selfish doing that. Like, I know it's important in my head. Like, I think a lot of people actually understand the importance of self-care in their heads. When it comes to actually like doing it, it's so much harder, especially because it means like when you're home and your baby's home, it's like, well, no, I should be taking care of this baby right now. And so, it's hard it's easier said than done, I should say, but obviously taking care of yourself is going to help you be the best parent for your baby. And so people are concerned about carving out that time, not feeling guilty about it, not feeling selfish about it. That has all come up as a huge concern for many of the parents that we work with.
You've advised companies for years as a consultant. Building
Yeah.
one is different. What have you had to learn that consulting just never required?
Gosh, so many things. And I will say, just shout out to consulting and all my consultant friends who I'm sure are listening to this. I am so grateful for that experience. And I feel like there were so many skills I learned as a consultant that I bring with me to my role as a founder. And I'm very grateful for that experience. I think there are some big learnings, though, that I don't know if I would have necessarily gotten as a consultant in a big corporate environment. Um, I think one of the biggest things is just this idea of me telling my story and having that be part of what makes Josie tick. That was a huge shift for me. I didn't really do that in my corporate job. And I remember when I started Josie, my team members would encourage me. They would say, you need to tell your story more. Tell why this is important to you. Talk about why it's connected to our mission and the impact you want to have. And I was so uncomfortable doing it.
The vulnerability, for sure.
Oh my gosh, yes, feeling so vulnerable, so
Mhm.
exposed, and feeling like, why? I also had this whole thing where I said, Josie is not about me though. It's a bigger thing than that. And my team would kind of be like, okay. um, but over time, I would say it took, probably a year to a year and a half. I started to realize that when I told my stories, it would resonate with people. And people would say to me, my gosh, like I feel seen. I understand, like I can empathize with you. And I'm like, okay, wait, maybe, this is actually a really important thing. And it can be actually helpful. And yes, sure, it like is also great for the Josie story and for like being able to partner and work with people. But just that story in and of itself having value, I had to learn that. And I think for a lot of founders, especially if you're creating something that is sort of born out of personal challenge, being able to articulate and tell that story is really important. And it may not come naturally to you at first, but over time, you'll start to realize that it is as much of a benefit to others as it is to yourself because you're building self awareness as you are able to articulate your story more and why it's so important to you. And if I'm being honest, I also just terrified of what people would think, that vulnerability aspect. I'm like, what if this doesn't resonate? What if people don't like me? What if they don't like my story? And it's so not about that. It's just, and I think having to unlearn that too. So anyways, that's one of probably, a list of 100 things, but that one I would say is a huge lesson and change from the corporate environment.
To your point, those founders, especially in healthcare, who are coming at it from a lived experience, that vulnerability also lends itself to credibility to say, hey, I did this, I learned, I didn't know. And this is how I'm taking those learnings and those lessons and being
Mm.
able to give them back to folks who will run into the same things I did. I found that lived experience has definitely been a driver and also a very attractive part of their brand.
I love that you reframed that to your story being a credibility builder. I'm going to take that, by the way, because in consulting, credibility building is charts, bar graphs, data, PowerPoint slides, being very polished and rehearsed in
Mhm.
everything you say, fixing problems. To like unlearn that, kind of like pull back from that and see credibility in your own story. That is a huge shift for someone who may have been in a position like mine. And so to think of it as a credibility builder, I love your framing of that because I haven't really thought of it that way, but you're right. Because that's now part of like the solution you're building.
Well, and someone sees your story and says, you had problems with that having to ship back breast milk. I had the same issue. How did you solve that? Like there's just that alignment and that like mindedness that comes from that you don't get that in bar charts. Although, insights are great. but you don't
Yes,
get that
I
comfort. So when you think about Josie today, what feels most different from your original idea?
Oh my gosh. Yes. There were so many pivots and changes along the way. But the core of our mission never changed. Ultimately, our goal is to help people and help organizations retain their workforce because we truly believe that parents make for some of the best leaders. But in terms of what's changed from back then to now, I think I was thinking about this question a lot, Erin, when you shared it. And I think I have two answers. I have a more this is our product answer, and I have more of a me as a founder answer. And I think just over time, my confidence in what we built and the value of it has just dramatically changed from beginning to now. Like many women that maybe you really feel like you got to prove it all out before you can have any credibility and any place to be able to say, like, this is something that you need and that this is something that has a lot of value. And over time, I think, and yes, we've gotten hundreds of client testimonials now and data points to show all that. But I think over time, what I've learned is just how much value we're providing. And this kind of ties back to the story thing, right? The value in my story. And that has led to an increased confidence in just what we're building. And that does sometimes just take time. So for anyone on your listening that is thinking about building something, that does sometimes just take actual time to build. You're not going to flip a switch and all of a sudden be like, I'm now like the most confident CEO founder out there, and I'm like going to go out there and pitch this thing, and that's great. But like, it took some time for me to get there. And I would say in year 3, now into 4, going to 4, I'm like much farther along than I was when we started when it comes to just believing in it and believing in myself. And then the more practical piece that I think has changed from a product perspective is we have partnered with so many employee resource groups in the past year, which is not something we did in the beginning. So employee resource groups, or ERGs, are typically employee led groups that support their members in through events, through activations, through Slack channels, etc. And the ERG that we've partnered with in particular at many organizations are ones that are focused on parents and caregivers. So they are wonderful to work with, great community building opportunities for organizations. And we've done a ton of event and content with these ERGs as a means to be able to get the word out about Josie, but also share our content and some of our learnings with them in a more scalable way outside of our one-on-one coaching. And so that's been just a joy. And I think especially for anyone who works in healthcare, that's a big difference between healthcare and non. I've noticed that healthcare doesn't have many of these. I think our team did some research on which healthcare organizations currently have ERGs, or sometimes they're called BRGs, business resource groups, and there are very few, if any. So something to consider. It's really such a wonderful way to build community within organizations.
As you close this out, what would be your advice to offer founders as they start out in 2026?
Ooh, I have a lot of advice. I am a consultant after all. It's so funny because I was talking to one of my coaches before this call. And so I'm not a coach myself. I've been a coachee before and I love it, but I am not a coach. And we were talking about, because we're going to do an event together, about defining what coaching is for people who participate, because sometimes, you're not really sure. It's kind of still a new concept to a lot of people. Like, is it therapy? Is it advice giving? Is it something entirely different? And she was saying that she thinks she's pinned down why it might be hard for me to ever become a coach because I do like to give advice. She's like, I like, you're a consultant. You like to fix things. You like to problem solve. You like to give advice. You were trained literally for 13 years to do that.
Results oriented. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Whereas a coach's job is to guide, is to ask questions to help you reflect and come to a conclusion on your own. That's what coaching is. And being very thoughtful about how you guide someone through that. But that's, I think, why I struggle sometimes with being a coach or trying to be a coach. But that was a very long-winded way to get to your actual question about giving one piece of advice. So I thought about this, and the one I would say is, if you're thinking about starting something, and I shared this in my TED Talk as well, it was my 5th lesson. I have 5 lessons for founders. And the 5th lesson was this: if you're thinking about starting something, make sure it's something that you care about so much that you can see yourself doing it for the next 10, 15 years, that it lights a fire under you, that you think the world would be a little bit better if you did the thing, because it is really going to consume you. And unless you just are so passionate about it, it's not gonna go very far. And I know this because I've spoken to so many people who either want to start a business or have started a business or have done so, and it's just kind of tapered off. And what I've noticed is often people want to start something because they're like, I don't like my current whatever I'm doing. I need to do something on my own. Let me find something that I'm good at. Let's do it, you know? Um, and so they'll ask me like for advice about, how do I start this thing, et cetera. And I ask them, well, what is the problem you're going to be solving? And they don't have an answer. They're like, well, I'm not really sure yet. I just know I'm going to do something in this space. And unless you think it's so important that you are willing to pour yourself into it and really put in the effort and the work, don't do it or find something that does. You know what I mean? Because you'll burn out fast and you could be using that time for something that does actually drive you and give you that desire to want to like really just run at it. So that would be my one piece of advice.
Yeah, I totally understand that passion aspect of it. Are you willing to not go with a salary?
Oh
You
my God.
really have to be digging in
You
and
really
really
like it.
passionate to do that because that's
Yeah.
really the reality is
Yeah.
it's a thankless at the very beginning for,
Yeah.
however long it takes to get to profit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
the other thing too. Like if you're just doing it because you're like, okay, I can like launch a business and sell it in 3 years. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm set. Like that's also like, it's not, it's
It's not a reality. It's not a
no,
reality.
no.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and expertise and your story with us and all of your credibility. I appreciate you taking the time and I look forward to sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Erin. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to No Operating Manual. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and a review, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. No Operating Manual is hosted and produced by Erin O'Brien of Chemistry, a healthcare marketing and communication advisory. Visit our website at choosechemistry.com.